This episode is sponsored by Kerkering Barberio, your trusted partner in tax, audit, and outsourced accounting services. Serving Sarasota, Manatee, and the greater Tampa Bay area for over 50 years, KB helps clients achieve their personal and business goals. Visit kbgrp.com to learn more. Hello and welcome to the Business Observer from the Corner Office podcast. I'm Mark Gordon, managing editor of the Business Observer. Today's guest is Natalie Johnson, co-founder of Vidl Work, a cultural transformation firm in Sarasota and Bradenton. Natalie, thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely. Super excited, Mark.
Yes. And you and I have known each other a couple of years, and I got to know you from seeing you speak first at a Sarasota Chamber event. And I know you do work all over the country, but also work locally. So let's start with a little bit about Vidl Work. What is Vidl Work and what is your niche and what do you guys do?
So Vidl Work is a culture transformation firm. We support companies of all sizes in creating cultures so that employees and people can show up and perform to their capacity. And we do that by focusing on three areas: the energy of individual people. So that's well-being. That's physical, emotional, mental, spiritual well-being. So that's the first, energy. We also focus on connection, on teams, how well teams are able to communicate, how well they're able to have difficult conversations, create trust. And then the third component is courage and leadership. And so we like to say we bring energy, connection, and courage to work.
Well, and that's great. And we're going to get into it later about how you keep your energy up and your courage up, because I'm definitely curious about that. Okay, but so you have Vidl Work. I know you've been doing this work for a while. How'd you get into this field? You know, take me back to growing up and kind of how you evolved into where you are today.
I love that you want to go back as far as me growing up, because it really did start then. I grew up in a family with my mom, who owned a health club, and my dad, who owned a pharmacy and a home health care center. And so I went to work for both of them, weekends, evenings. And then when I went to school, I chose the path of fitness, human performance, and really continued the path that my mom had set. Yeah. And I studied human performance, specifically performance psychology, performance nutrition, and started this journey in working with athletes. And very quickly realized, all this stuff that we do to support athletes so they can perform well, everybody can do it. There's nothing here necessarily that normal people who are not normal, but other people who are not athletes can't do for the most part. And so I only worked with athletes for about 2.5, 3 years. And then I transitioned over to working with real people in all different capacities. So I worked in spa and resort industry, and I was a nutrition and exercise consultant. So I got to go live and work in Mexico and different resorts. Wow. Went back to school. When I went back to school, I started working for San Diego State University. And so I got into academics, taught human performance, exercise physiology, those type classes at San Diego State. And it was during my time there that I started to talk to people and companies who were saying things like, I think if our people were healthier, we could save money on healthcare. Yeah. And these conversations started happening on campus, and it also started happening around me with other companies I was working with. And that was ultimately when I decided I want to leave academics. I want to move back home to Florida, which is where my family was. And I'm going to start working on what companies are trying to do: save money on healthcare, increase performance of people at work. And fast forward, I did that for many, many years and learned a lot. And I think the main thing that I learned was that there's a lot of companies out there that are willing to invest time and financially into the health of their employees by doing things like fitness programs, fitness center, nutrition, diabetes education, kind of all these more physically focused programs. But people are not oftentimes able to engage and participate because there's other things happening at work. Yeah. And so we discovered through that process, myself as well as other colleagues working in the industry, like, there's a big investment here and it's not really saving money on healthcare. It's not working. What's wrong? And that's really where the conversation around Vidl Work came, which was myself and a colleague, Rebecca, who today is my business partner. We started asking really important questions of employees. Questions like, you have access to all of these amazing resources, free personal trainers, free dietitians, health coaching, diabetes specialists. Why aren't you using them? What gets in your way? And what we heard was maybe a bit surprising, which was what gets in their way is relationships at work, relationships with each other, relationships with their boss, micromanaging, high stress, overwhelm. By the time I'm done with work, I've got nothing left. I don't feel safe participating in those programs. What will people think of me? What will they say? And so Vidl Work was created on what I like to call the real root issue of what gets in the way of people being able to take care of themselves and show up and perform at work. And I'll pause there because that was a lot.
No, that's great. That's so entrepreneurial too, right? Obviously, the Business Observer, I don't know, obvious, but it should be. We write about entrepreneurs, and so you have that background too. You take us. So you're both your parents own separate businesses. You grew up in an environment where, that's a risk, right? You run your own business. You got to make payroll. You got to do all these things. So you saw that environment growing up.
Yes, and it's interesting that you notice that and mention it because it's really just been within the last few years that I've realized it has never felt risky to me. And I think that's why, because I grew up in that environment. I saw it, but yet it can feel very risky to my business partner or other people on our team because they didn't experience that. And so that's what I grew up with. It has felt exciting to me, but never, I know there's a risk, but it doesn't feel risky to me.
Yeah, that's really neat. Okay, so you're doing this, and that, as my other point with that was too, that you're filling this need. That's a great entrepreneurial lesson, right? You saw that, hey, we have these great services we can do, but there are obstacles for people to use these services. That's where we fit in, is in sort of finding a way to eliminate, or not eliminate, but help people overcome those obstacles.
Oh, yeah, and it's overcome those obstacles so they can engage in taking care of themselves. And the other thing that was highlighted is the way that we need to take care of ourselves goes well beyond physical things. And so that's when we can have conversations around, what about people's mental health and their emotional well-being? How are employers actually supporting that? And that was really highlighted during COVID, and I think still a really important conversation.
Yeah, it's important. I think it's so important in work, and hopefully that, all the work that you do, this podcast, we've had a couple of people in similar positions as you are in on this podcast to kind of keep that spotlight on that. I think that's really important. And okay, so one of the curriculums, you've done a lot of different things within this teaching, and you and I have talked about this before, but Dare to Lead, you teach the Dare to Lead course. If someone is new to Dare to Lead research, what is Dare to Lead, and what are some key takeaways that somebody can take away from that?
Yeah, great question, Mark. It's Dare to Lead is a course in its entirety. It's 24 hours, and it is focused on the skill sets of courage. And the entire course is based on the research of Dr. Brene Brown. And so she's pretty mainstream today. Many people know who she is, and they really have embraced her research because a lot of her research is based on the humanness at work and how leaders, when we look at what it takes to be courageous, leaders really need to be leaning into some uncomfortable practices. And so if someone is new to the Dare to Lead curriculum, I think maybe the highlight of the whole curriculum and Brene's research is that courage is skill sets. It's skill sets. It's 4 very specific skill sets that are teachable, observable, and measurable. And those skill sets all come back to leaders being willing to get into the discomfort of being vulnerable and doing and saying things like, I don't have all the answers. I sometimes make mistakes. I also feel overwhelmed. And when we're able to really lean into the 4 skill sets of courage, it's all based on vulnerability. And so the second skill set is really knowing what it takes to operationalize and live into your values, use your values to help you make decisions, have hard conversations, how you can establish or reestablish trust with another person. We call that the skill set of braving trust. And then finally, the resiliency skill set, which is a process we call learning to rise.
Yeah, those were all super important. And, it's funny, Natalie, you and I talked off camera, off the screen right before about fun podcast guests we'd want to have on. And after you and I spoke, I think after your leadership or your Sarasota chamber presentation, I knew about Dr. Brene Brown, but I had never really read a lot of her stuff. And I read one of her books, and I actually reached out to have her come on this podcast, and her team actually responded that she's not doing podcasts right now, but I'm not giving up. So from the Corner Office podcast listeners, stay tuned. That might happen someday. You never know. Okay, but going back to Dare to Lead, what are some examples that you can cite from your career that you really worked with somebody to help them be vulnerable, or the braving, or any of these sort of techniques you talked about? Anything stand out in your mind where you worked with a client or a company?
I think the biggest client that stands out to me, that is highlighted for me because it was such an emotional experience for me, is I was several years ago asked to come and essentially teach the skill set of learning to rise. So teach resiliency to a group of people that were struggling with cancer. And our client was the Moffitt Institute in Tampa. And we had done work with them previously, but for this particular event, they wanted to do something to support their patients. And without getting too detailed around it, it was a scary thing for me, because that's not my typical audience. These aren't athletes. These aren't high-performing leaders. We're not trying to sustain levels of high performance. And the underlying knowledge that I had around the crowd was that the people that are going to be in your audience are not expected to live. And can you come teach them about resiliency? And so it felt very daunting to me. And so my experience in speaking to them was learning to rise. I needed to really think about, I don't feel confident. I feel really uncomfortable. This is going to be vulnerable for me, but maybe this discomfort is where we can connect to each other in the room and we can grow. And I did an activity with them where I had them just name the thing that feels the most stressful to you. And then think about, what is the story you're telling yourself about that thing, which most of them it was, I'm approaching the end of my life. I have cancer. And is there anything that you have learned? And what came from that session was a lot of people in a room talking about these extraordinary experiences that have happened in their life because they have cancer and are planning for the end of their life. And it was everything from, it was the thing that helped them to identify their true purpose in life. It was the thing that helped them show up the way they want to for their children. It was the thing that helped them find relationships. And it was a whole hour experience of hearing these people's stories. And so that's a lot of learning to rise. And it was happening within me around that experience, but it was also happening with the group of people in the room. That's amazing. The one that stands out to me the most.
Well, it should. I mean, I got chills just hearing that. I think that's credit to you for doing that. And I'm curious, sticking on your ability to learn to rise from that. I mean, what did you do? Did you do breathing exercises before? Did you pump yourself up? Did you listen to music? I'm just curious, Natalie, from your perspective, how did you create this? You've spoken in front of hundreds and hundreds of people, but now you got this huge challenge in front of you. How did you overcome that? How did you learn to rise?
Yeah. So there's kind of two questions buried in there. And one of them is, what is it that I do when I'm feeling anxious? And what is it that I do when I speak to people where maybe I don't feel confident? Or sometimes it's, what do you do in those moments where someone says something or asks a question that you really weren't expecting and you don't even know how to answer that? And so one of the things that I do personally is I do training in creating calm in myself because our body and our brain default to reactivity. And so the way that I train myself is actually very similar. This comes back to sport practices, is doing what we call is strategic micro recovery. And so I'm performing strategic micro recovery fairly often, especially when I'm speaking in front of groups. And that means I'm breathing in a certain way that forces calm on my body. It means I'm making myself pause and think before I respond in any way. If I react quickly, I might say something I don't mean. I might say something without thinking.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I'm really always trying to do a better job of is in my head, picture what I want to happen. Picture the story, picture the outcome that I want, and really give that a lot of thought and energy, because that takes away from what the brain wants to do, which is, what if I fail? What if this is terrible? What if I don't know what I'm talking about? Maybe I don't really know what I'm talking about. If we can train the brain to default to a different story, it helps us get some clarity on what we need to do in the moment. And so that was the first part of what I heard in your question, Mark, was what do I do in those moments of learning to rise? And my strategies are these consistent recovery strategies and a mindset shift.
Well, train the brain is so important, because you could also, your brain could be trained negatively, right? And that's bad. We're recording this here in mid-July, and I gave a talk at an organization in Tampa recently, in front of some economists and business people, and my self-confidence waned a little bit during the presentation as I looked around, and I'm thinking they're not into this. They're not into this. And it was like I had to snap myself back into place to get back on track. I had no evidence, so I had to train the brain would have been important there.
And Mark, that hits home with me so much, because what I've learned in my experiences is almost all audiences look like I'm not hitting the mark. I'm not hitting the mark. Because when people are intentionally listening, they have zero. And so
perfect. Yeah.
I always look for the person in the crowd that's smiling, and I zoom in on them. And there's usually a few. So I can look to this one. And I try to not pay attention to the people that just have no facial expression at all.
Stoic. Like my mom, stoic, just very stoic.
Yeah. I live with a bunch of stoic people, so I'm used to it.
So, well, you have two teenagers, I believe, right? So
yes.
It's
a
hard
stoic
to impress
husband.
them.
Yes. And who knows what they're feeling at any given moment, because it's the same stoic face all the time. Are you happy? Are you sad? Is this fun to you? I have no idea.
Right. They just say it's lit or it's epic. So our son overuses the word epic. I try to tell him, as a words person, if you use epic all the time, it's no longer epic.
It's no longer epic.
It's another conversation.
I'll take epic. I get fine. That's what I get the most
fine.
Of. How are you? Fine. How was it? Fine.
Fine.
What did you do? Was it fun? It was fine. It's always fine.
Fine. All fine. All right. I want to talk a little bit about leadership, because you're a leader, obviously, yourself in your business and in your life and your career. But you've also worked with a lot of leaders at these clients and different things. What stands out to you? What makes a good leader? What are some of the characteristics that make for good leaders?
I think regardless of what a leader's personality type is or skill set type, the theme that stands out to me around the best leaders is their ability to be and show their humanness, their ability to be and show things or say things like you just did, Mark, where I was giving this speech and it looked like this is really not hitting. No, it was really, really hard. Their willingness to share stories like that, or step back and let other people take the lead, or share with people. It's really hard for me to integrate my work and life in a way that feels good to me, but I'm working on it. It's really hard for me to go on vacation and let everyone take over, but I'm gonna try it anyway. I'm gonna put so it's really about their humanness and their ability to, we call it confident humility. And so they're able to be very confident, but also human at the same time. And that comes in all different sizes, shapes, and forms, but people feel that. And you can feel the confident humility and the humanness in some of the greatest leaders pretty quickly.
Yeah. Confident humility. I love that. That's a great takeaway. Natalie, who are some of your mentors and what have you learned from them?
It's such an interesting question because when I think of mentor, I don't think I've ever had a formal, well, maybe once I had a formal mentorship relationship, but I would think of people as more informal mentors in that they've had huge impacts on my life because I've had the opportunity to work collaboratively with them or in pieces with them, and they've left me with so much. But I don't think it's ever been a formal, will you be my mentor type relationship. The first one that comes to mind for me is Dr. Jim Loehr. He is a world-renowned sports psychologist. He founded the Human Performance Institute. He's written many books.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I've been teaching his research around energy management and performance for over 15 years. And there was a time where I got to be with him in a room and co-facilitate. I got to be around him and listen to his stories. And he's an amazing storyteller. And he's just one of those people where he walks into a room and you feel his calming presence. And many of his quotes have stuck with me over time. And so one thing that I often quote him on is that your story creates your destiny. And so whatever story it is you're telling yourself about what's going to happen, why you do and don't do things in your life, that is creating your destiny. Yes. And that's stuck with me in a way to know, like, I need to be aware of the story I'm telling myself. And that's really where it comes from with my recovery around create the story you want, create the story of what you want to happen, because that's the destiny. And then it all comes back to that visualization that comes from athletics as well. Visualize winning, visualize what you want. And so I would say he's definitely one of them. I also consider my business partner, Rebecca, as a great mentor to me. She is my extreme opposite in all ways, I think. Personality type, skill set. She has that same sense that Dr. Loehr has, that when she walks into a room, you just feel her calming presence. And because we're so different, I learn from her probably almost every day. Yeah. And it's a reciprocal relationship because we are so different. But I would say she's the most active mentor in my life in an unofficial capacity.
Rebecca, where'd you guys meet? Because her last name is Johnson, but you're not related.
Yes. No, not related. So Rebecca and I were on the same journey working with employers on creating well-being strategies. She was doing it for Blue Cross Blue Shield. I think she worked for Burger King for a while. She did some entrepreneurial adventures around live fitness classes at work before streaming was around. And so I met her many years ago when we were both working in the space of workplace well-being. And I just immediately connected with her and we stayed in touch. And I used to bring her in to help me with clients periodically. And we just said for a long, long time, gosh, it's too bad we can't work more formally together more often. We're such a good team. Yeah. And it just so happened in 2017, an opportunity came up for her where she said, I think I feel comfortable enough to let go of the full-time job and be an entrepreneur and give this thing a go. And I was ready for it.
Awesome. We're going to have some rapid fire questions in a second. Before we get to the end rapid fire, I have one last question, and I'm trying this question out. We're all about constant improvement on the From the Corner Office podcast. But you are, Natalie, and I'm not joking, the perfect person for this question, this debut of this question. What's one thing you would advise people to do that they can improve their lives on? Make their lives better?
Oh, so a general make your life better, not just make work better.
Right. Could it, it could be eat better, but you're going to do better than that. But what's one thing you could advise people to do to improve their lives in some way?
Okay, so that's an easy one for me. The one thing that people could do to improve their lives in some way, if they haven't done it already, is really put some energy and some time into clarifying what their purpose is in their life. And I think a lot of people might have some things dancing around their head around what they want to do, what they want to be seen as. But many of us, myself included, when we don't put time and energy into clarifying what we think our purpose is and how we can contribute to the world, what you end up doing is wasting your energy all over the place on all kinds of things that maybe don't even matter that much. When you begin to put some thought and effort into what your purpose is, it becomes very clear where you need to set boundaries in your life. It becomes very clear what you need to do for yourself around well-being so that you can show up and live into that purpose. It highlights at a higher level and more consistently who the people and things are in your life that deserve the best from you. And it's life-changing. And it's also another gift that I received from Dr. Jim Lair's work about 16, 17 years ago when I started learning and teaching his research was I had to put some time and energy into my purpose. And it just highlighted so much for me and has been a continuing theme for me around making sure you're connected to the purpose of your life, but also connected to the purpose of what you are doing. Yeah. Otherwise, people come and steal all your energy away from you.
Yes. Love it. Clarify your purpose. Okay, awesome. Natalie, we're going to do 3 rapid fire questions, okay?
Okay.
You have no choice. You have to do it. Okay, beach or mountain vacation? What would you choose, beach or mountain?
So hard. In general, beach, but my oldest son lives in the mountains now. So vacation with him in the mountains, but beach in general.
Interesting. That's a relatively new one too. And even in Florida, people constantly answer beach. I thought I was going to get much more mountains, but I'm getting a lot of beaches. Unscientific. Okay.
Yeah.
Who are 2 people that you'd like to have dinner with, dead or alive?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind for me is Sylvester Stallone, aka Rocky Balboa. That has been a huge, my favorite of all time. I could watch those movies over and over and over again. I'm just so invested in the story of Rocky. I would love to sit down and have dinner with Sylvester Stallone and talk more about Rocky. Gosh, the dead or alive is what's getting me because I'm just thinking there's somebody. I'm gonna say Jesus.
I mean, you could have ended it. That's amazing and great too, but you could have ended with Rocky. Natalie. I don't know how good I did that. Talk about being vulnerable on the From the Corner Office podcast. Last.
It should have been yo Natalie.
Yo Natalie. Me more deeper. This one's gonna sound really weak after that one. But what's your favorite? No. What's your favorite dessert?
Oh, Mark, you don't know this yet? I'm surprised we haven't talked about this. Donuts, and I made a peanut butter pie last night. That's one of them. But one of my favorite foods in general, dessert or not, is donuts. I've always loved donuts. And for a long time, when I would teach about how to eat for your best performance, one of the things that I would say is you should eat all the foods that you need and want. And when you want something like me, when I want a donut, if that donut has the potential, if it has potential to be the best donut you've ever eaten, you should eat it. And what came from me telling that story over and over again is people started remembering me as, oh, you're the donut girl, you're the donut girl. And so I started visiting donut stores on my travels and trying to find the best donut in each city that I travel to. And so before COVID, I started an Instagram page called My Donut Diaries, and I track my donut journeys. And I just recently restarted My Donut Diaries. It's out there. But it makes my travel more fun too, because when I'm traveling by myself, I can really ask around and find what's the best donut store in your town. And I go try them.
I feel
and
like
document
the travels of Natalie. I feel like on social media, I saw that maybe you were in Denver recently. Do I remember that? No, you were somewhere. I feel like out west, and maybe did you try donuts out west?
Where I was it was Ohio. I was in Ohio.
Oh man, I'm so flyover. That's not really okay. But did you try donuts in Ohio?
Yes. Oh, awesome. Yes. Yes, I did. And it used to be a more consistent posting of here's the donut. Let me give it a ranking. Here's where it is. Sometimes now it's hard to get to the best donut store because my schedule's not allowing. And I was recently in Maine where I found this donut store and I was going to go, but I had a keynote from 9:30 to 10:45 and the donut store closed at 11 and I couldn't get there.
Couldn't get there in time.
I've recently started it back up again, and most people know that about me, that I'm a donut person.
I'm so glad I learned it, as well as the From the Corner Office podcast listeners.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Natalie Johnson of Vidl Work, thank you so much. This was a really good conversation. Thanks for joining us on the From the Corner Office podcast.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you for listening to the Business Observer From the Corner Office podcast. I'm your host, Mark Gordon. This podcast was produced by Reed Corley of the Corley Company in Sarasota. To hear more episodes of From the Corner Office podcast, go to businessobserverfl.com.